Have you ever watched The Sound of Music and thought you were seeing one of the most perfectly crafted films ever put to screen? The sweeping Austrian Alps, the spotless costumes, the pitch-perfect singing, it all looks so effortless. But here is the truth, even legends have their cracks. Hidden inside this timeless classic are bloopers, behind-the-scenes secrets, and real-life details that were quietly swept under the rug before the cameras ever started rolling. Some of these mistakes are hiding in plain sight, frozen in frames that have been watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world, and almost nobody noticed. Today, we're going to look closer. Much closer. Get ready, because what you are about to discover will completely change the way you watch this movie. When Julie Andrews sat down with that guitar in hand, singing to the Von Trapp children with a warm, effortless smile, audiences around the world believed every second of it. What they did not know was that Andrews had never played the guitar before filming began. The instrument was entirely new to her, and the challenge of coordinating her fingers on the strings while simultaneously singing full songs under the pressure of a live film set turned out to be far more difficult than anyone had anticipated. To manage her nerves before particularly demanding guitar sequences, Andrews reportedly took small sips of Austrian schnapps, a strong local spirit, to calm herself before the cameras rolled. It was a very human solution to a very real problem, and it is the kind of detail the studio certainly never put in press materials. Meanwhile, Christopher Plummer, who played Captain Von Trapp, also went through guitar and vocal training to prepare for his role. He practiced diligently. But when the final version of the film was assembled, none of his actual playing or singing made the cut. Professional musicians were brought in to re-record both the guitar parts and the vocals that audiences hear in the finished film. So the next time you watch Captain Von Trapp pick up that guitar, remember, the hands might be his, but everything you hear is someone else entirely. The scene where the Von Trapp family tumbles out of a rowboat looks like a fun, chaotic moment of slapstick. On screen it plays almost as comedy. Behind the scenes, it was anything but. Kim Carruth, the young girl cast as Gretel, the youngest Von Trapp child, did not know how to swim. Not even a little. When the boat tipped during filming and everyone hit the water, the plan was for Julie Andrews to immediately grab her and keep her safe. That plan fell apart instantly. Andrews lost her footing as she fell backward and could not reach the child in time. Carruth went fully under, swallowed a significant amount of water, and became genuinely ill. She ended up vomiting, and the unfortunate recipient of that was Heather Menzies, the actress playing Louisa, one of the older Von Trapp daughters. Menzies handled it with grace, but it was not exactly the light-hearted afternoon the production had planned. Carruth recovered without lasting harm, but the memory of that afternoon stuck with everyone on set for the rest of the shoot. Next time that scene comes on, you will never quite look at it the same way again. Christopher Plummer is one of the most respected stage and screen actors of the 20th century. He had range, gravitas, and a reputation for taking on complex, serious material. So when The Sound of Music came along, all sunshine and singing children and redemptive love stories, Plummer was not exactly enthusiastic. In private, he reportedly referred to the film using a series of unflattering nicknames, playfully mocking its sweetness and what he saw as its overly sentimental tone. Here is something that will quietly astonish you. The grand, stately Von Trapp family home that you see in the film, the one with the sweeping entrance and the manicured grounds, is not one location at all. The production team used two completely separate buildings to represent the same house. The front exterior was filmed at one location, the back at another. They were then edited together so seamlessly that generations of viewers never questioned it. The interiors were not filmed at either location. They were constructed from scratch on studio sets at a Hollywood backlit. Even the beloved gazebo, where the famous 16 going on 17 sequence takes place, was purpose-built for the movie. After production wrapped, it was moved twice before eventually finding a permanent home at Hellbrunn Palace in Salzburg, Austria, where fans can visit it to this day. Perhaps most surprisingly, the graveyard scene, the tense sequence where the Von Trapp family hides from Nazi soldiers among the tombstones, was not filmed in Austria at all. That entire scene was shot on a purpose-built set in California. Some tour guides in Salzburg have historically claimed the actual location as a filming site, but official records tell a very different story. Long before Hollywood came calling, a German film producer approached Maria Von Trapp in the mid-1950s to buy the rights to her autobiography. He offered her $10,000. Maria, curious about whether she might also receive a share of any profits the film generated, asked the question directly. The producer told her that German law prohibited royalty payments to non-German citizens, and since Maria had become an American citizen, she would not be eligible for any ongoing share of the earnings. Maria believed him. She signed the contract. A short time later, the same producer returned and offered her $9,000 in cash if she agreed immediately to finalize the deal. For the Von Trapp family at the time, that amount of money was significant, more than they had ever made from a single source. She took it. The film presents Maria as the hired governess for all 7 Von Trapp children, arriving to restore warmth and music to an entire household. The reality was considerably more modest. In 1926, the Nonnberg Abbey in Salzburg received a request from George Von Trapp, a retired naval captain, for someone to come and tutor a single child. His daughter, also named Maria, had contracted scarlet fever. The illness had previously taken his wife's life, and now it had left his daughter too weak to make the long walk to school each day. The Abbey selected a 21-year-old novice named Maria Augusta Kuchera for the assignment. She was a teacher in training who had been living at the Abbey partly due to her own health difficulties. The arrangement was meant to be temporary, 10 months of tutoring, after which she would return and continue her path toward taking her vows. Of course, things did not go as planned. Maria stayed far longer than 10 months, and the rest became one of the most famous stories of the 20th century. Ernest Lehman, who wrote the screenplay, had one actress in mind from the very beginning, Julie Andrews. As far as he was concerned, there was no conversation to be had. But when director Robert Wise joined the production, he arrived with different ideas. His initial preferences leaned toward Grace Kelly, who had by then become Princess of Monaco and effectively retired from acting, and Shirley Jones, a highly regarded musical actress of the era. Everything changed when Wise got access to early footage from Mary Poppins, a Disney production that Andrews had completed but that had not yet been released. Watching her on screen, Wise immediately understood what Lehman had seen from the start. Her presence, her voice, and the particular quality of warmth and intelligence she brought to every frame convinced him that she was the only possible choice. Andrews herself came close to declining. She worried that the material would feel too sweet and too detached from reality to be meaningful. Wise and Lehman shared exactly that concern, and their conversation with her about grounding the story in genuine human emotion was what ultimately persuaded her to commit. She signed on for $225,000, a substantial sum at the time, and delivered what many consider one of the defining screen performances of the 1960s. One of the details that upset the surviving Von Trapp children most deeply about the film was the portrayal of their father. The movie presents George Von Trapp as cold, distant, and almost militaristic in his relationship with his own children, summoning them with a whistle, demanding rigid obedience, keeping music out of the household, as though it were a foreign intruder. In reality, George Von Trapp was by all accounts a warm and genuinely loving father. Yes, he used a whistle to call the children, each with a different signal, so they knew who was being summoned, and yes, he dressed them in matching outfits. But he never marched them in formation or treated them like soldiers. His son Johannes Von Trapp later described his father to the BBC as a generous, charming, and open man who bore almost no resemblance to the stern figure in the film. Authors and historians who studied the family have noted that it was actually Maria, the stepmother, who had the greater emotional difficulty. She had been raised in a harsh and loveless environment, and expressing warmth did not come naturally to her. Maria herself tried to work with the filmmakers to present George more accurately, but she was unable to convince them. The dramatic tension of a cold father who rediscovers joy made for a more cinematic story, even if it was largely fictional. The film introduces a character named Max Detweiler, a charming, somewhat opportunistic impresario who manages the Von Trapp family's musical career and helps arrange their appearance at the Salzburg Festival. He is fictional. What is not fictional is the real person he partially replaced. Father Franz Wasner was a Catholic priest who came into the Von Trapp's lives when the family began renting out rooms in their home during the economic hardships of the 1930s. After hearing them sing, Father Wasner recognized a level of natural musical ability that he believed could be developed into something serious. He became their musical director, working patiently with each family member to elevate their technique and cohesion as an ensemble. Julie Andrews plays Maria as gentle, a little dreamy, and endearingly awkward, someone who breaks the occasional rule, but always with an innocent, wide-eyed quality. The actual Maria Augusta Kuchera was something else altogether. By her own description, she was a force of nature at the Abbey, restless, loud, and genuinely difficult to manage within the strict structure of convent life. She described herself in a 1980 interview as one of the most disruptive novices the Abbey had seen. She broke dishes. She talked when silence was required. She ran through the courtyard. She whistled Gregorian chants, music meant to be performed with solemn reverence, as though they were cheerful folk tunes. She climbed onto the roof of the convent building. She was, in her own words, the worst you could imagine. The real Maria was not a soft-spoken girl who struggled to find her place. She was an eruption in a white habit, barely contained by the Abbey's walls. The film's softened version of her is almost unrecognizable to anyone who reads her actual account of those years. The film presents a love story between Maria and Captain Von Trapp as a sweeping, gradual romance, two people discovering their feelings for each other while the political storm of 1938 builds around them. The reality involved a very different emotional timeline. George and Maria Von Trapp were actually married in November of 1927, more than a decade before they left Austria. George was 25 years older than Maria, and their relationship did not begin as a fairy tale. According to Maria's own written account, George asked her not simply to marry him, but to stay and be a mother to his children. She agreed, not because she was in love with him, but because she loved the children deeply and felt that God had guided her toward that family. She later reflected that if he had proposed marriage outright from the start, she might have said no. Love, she said, came with time. Real love, as she described it, grew slowly out of commitment, shared responsibility, and the genuine partnership they built together over years. The movie's romantic framing is emotionally satisfying, but it compresses and reshapes something that was quieter, stranger, and arguably more meaningful than any film could quite capture. The climactic escape sequence, the Von Trapp family climbing over the Alps in the dark, clutching children and musical instruments, with Nazi soldiers closing in, is one of the most dramatic moments in the film. It is also almost entirely invented. Official records held in the United States National Archives, along with interviews given by family members over the decades, paint a very different picture of what actually happened. The family left Austria in broad daylight. They boarded a train. They told people they were traveling to perform in Italy. There was no midnight mountain crossing, no soldiers in pursuit, no desperate scramble through the snow. George Von Trapp had been born in a coastal region that became part of Italy after World War I, which meant he was eligible for Italian citizenship. The family used that citizenship to travel legally to Italy, and from there made their way to London before eventually sailing to the United States. The real escape was calm, strategic, and remarkably well organized. A dramatic mountain crossing would have been unnecessary and impractical. The Austrian-Italian border, at that time, was not guarded by the dramatic alpine terrain the film implies. The truth is less cinematic, but in some ways more impressive. They walked out in plain sight, calmly, and no one tried to stop them. In the early 1960s, 20th Century Fox was in serious financial trouble. The studio had poured an extraordinary amount of money into an epic historical production about Cleopatra. Originally budgeted at $2 million, the film ballooned catastrophically during production, ultimately costing the studio somewhere in the range of $44 million. Cleopatra earned money at the box office, but nowhere near enough to cover what had been spent. Fox was staring directly at potential bankruptcy. Then came The Sound of Music. The studio was cautious about it. Musicals had been losing ground with audiences, and no one was certain whether a long, earnest family film set in pre-war Austria was what the public wanted in 1965. They were spectacularly wrong to worry. The film opened to enormous audiences and never slowed down. It became the highest-grossing film of 1965. By late 1966, it had surpassed Gone with the Wind as the highest-grossing film ever made at that point in history, a record Gone with the Wind had held for 24 years. The profits generated by The Sound of Music did not just help Fox recover. They effectively saved the studio entirely, providing the financial foundation the company needed to survive and continue operating. A film about singing, love, and escape from fascism, shot partly with a nervous, schnapps-sipping leading lady learning guitar on the fly, turned out to be one of the most consequential motion pictures in Hollywood history. And somewhere hidden in all of that perfection